And this is Cynthia Frances Gensheimer. I'm going to conduct the interview. Today is December 10th, 2023, and I am interviewing Jacqui, and your maiden name is Miller, right,
Yes.
Jacqui? Beckett at her home in Denver for the Colorado National Council of Jewish Women's Oral History Project. Jacqui, let's begin by you're telling me a little bit about your family. Start, please, with the names of your mother and father.
Okay, so my mom's name is Barbara Louise Levin Miller. She goes by Bobby Lou. She was born in Norfolk, Virginia, and so she always says that good Southern girls always have two names. My father is H. Michael Miller. The H really doesn't stand for anything. And Michael, he usually goes by Mike.
He was born in Denver?
Yes, my father is from Denver.
And tell me how his family came to Colorado.
Well, my great-grandfather, my children are fifth-generation Denverites, and my great-grandfather came across this country with his brother. They came to New York fleeing the pogroms of Russia from what now is the Ukraine, but at the time was Russia. And my understanding of the story is my great-grandfather was about to turn 13, and his parents sent him and his brother away so that the Tsar didn't pick them up, because what would happen is they would come around and take children, boys, before their bar mitzvah, and then they would never see them again, and they would serve in the army and probably die. So they came and they went to New York, and my understanding is that they peddled their way across the country and they ended up in Colorado. His brother became a kosher butcher and he became a rancher, and the family ranched and raised cattle here for generations, up and down the Front Range here from Laramie, Wyoming down to about Pueblo.
So it was a big family business, but that started in a very small way.
Yes, they homesteaded most of it.
So a rags to riches story, would you say? Or?
I don't know if I would say that, but they worked really hard for it. They built a home that's on 8th in St. Paul, and when it went up on the market recently, we went and viewed it, and they said, oh, it's got this beautiful 4-car garage, and my father said, oh, yeah. My father was raised in that home, and he said that, oh, it wasn't for 4 cars. The reason it was built at that time was because they would bring the farm equipment, the ranching equipment in and park it for Shabbos, and they needed to pull it all the way in. So when you have a big, huge truck, you needed space that would have held 2 cars. So it was 2 cars, but really 2 trucks instead of 4 cars. But yeah, my great-grandfather, who my father called Zadie, had 6 boys, and then they raised also another boy and a girl of a relative who had passed away. They had been orphaned. So there were 7 boys in that home and 1 girl, and the house had 3 bedrooms.
Wow.
And 1 bath. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. Now, when we looked at it, it still has only 3 bedrooms, but it has 3 baths.
Which wasn't very unusual
Yes.
at that time.
Yes.
So your father grew up doing some sort of ranching?
Yeah, he did. He tells a story about when he was young. He took a calf to the fair in Chicago on the train. So,
Honestly?
yeah, honestly.
Wow. And in terms of religious observance, how would you characterize the home in which he grew up?
I was very religious. It was an Orthodox home. He tells stories about how he broke his arm on Rosh Hashanah and came home and wouldn't tell anybody because he wasn't supposed to be out playing. So he had to wait to tell him he had broken his arm. But they would, his Zadie was a very religious man, and he grew up in a kosher home and in a religious environment.
And in terms of communal involvement, were they active in the Jewish community?
They were very involved in the Jewish community. Of those 6 boys, I don't remember if it's 2 or 3 of them were doctors, and they founded what is now National Jewish Hospital along with several others.
And did you grow up hearing any stories about any anti-Semitism that had been experienced by anyone in your family?
I really didn't hear about a lot of anti-Semitism growing up, about anti-Semitism within the family.
And they all, your father and the rest of the children in the family, did they go to public school?
Yep, they did. They graduated from East High.
And then where did he go to college?
My father went to the University of Colorado, and then he went to law school at Columbia.
And how did he choose those particular schools?
I don't know for sure.
And he became a lawyer?
Yep, my father's practiced law now since 1966.
Wow.
Maybe 65, somewhere in that range. And he still works today.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah.
Would you tell me a little bit about your mother's family, how they wound up going to Norfolk, Virginia?
So I don't know the whole story of how they ended up in Norfolk, but my mother's mother grew up in New York City, and their family had been there. They had also come from the same area in the Ukraine, which I'll tell you a story in a second about that. But I don't know how they got down to Virginia from there. But her father, my mother called her Big Daddy. Big Daddy was my mother's mother died in childbirth with my grandmother's younger sister. So he was raising two girls on his own. And I suspect he moved down I know that once there, family helped him. So there was family there. My mother's father's family was a large family, and they had come out west and were mining. They came following the gold mining. The two oldest children were born in Butte, Montana, and then they ended up back somehow in Virginia, not in Norfolk, in a small community, farming community. And when my grandfather passed away, we got in the car and we drove down there with a great uncle of mine who got out of the car, and this gentleman came running towards him and said, "Abe Louine, is that you?" And they had grown up together, and it was a African-American man who was also in his 80s, maybe not his 80s, but his 70s. My grandfather died in his mid-60s. But so anyway, they had then migrated into Norfolk, and my grandfather, who we called Daddy Harry, ran a shipping store for commodities for those that came off the ships in the shipping yard, and they would buy different things. And I used to go down to that store as a little girl, and he would let me pick anything out in the store, and the toys and whatnot. But he was self-taught, and he knew at least 6 languages. It was amazing. And at one point, they went on a trip to Norway, which is where a lot of these boats came from, and he got in a cab, and the cab driver turned around and said, "Harry Levin, is that you?" And sure enough, he had met this gentleman many times in the store as he had come back and forth on the boats. So they grew up in Norfolk, and Mom had been there. And then Mom went to school in New York, and Mom and Dad were set up on a blind date by that woman who I said there was one girl in the house. She had moved to New York and gotten married, and her family set Dad up on a date. And he was really late that day and didn't, the dorm that she was living in closed. It was a female dorm, and they closed it, and they didn't want to let him in. And she said, "Well, I'm going to look down, and if I think he's handsome, I'll go down and talk to him." And so she did, and they went out, and he took her on the Staten Island ferry because he was a broke student, and they went back and forth on the ferry, and they fell in love, and the rest is history. So they dated in New York City, and they moved out here once they got married, which was literally the week Dad graduated from law school.
So was she from a similarly observant Jewish family, would you
No,
say?
she was not. She was from a more Reform family.
And is that then the way you were brought up?
No, we really were brought up in a very, what I would call traditional style. We were, it wasn't as orthodox as my father's family had been, and we did not keep a kosher home because Mom didn't have that background. But we sat down every Friday night for dinner together and lit candles and had a Shabbos dinner. My father used to say, you can do anything after dinner, but dinner, if we can't get together and have Shabbos, then we shouldn't be a family. And we did that. My father was president of our synagogue 3 different times. And my great-grandfather was one of the founders of our congregation here. Our congregation is a traditional modern Orthodox type congregation, but we sit our men and women together, which is a dying breed. It's the only congregation left like that in the country, but there, with the time, it was always established that way. And when I was growing up, there were about 15 in the country.
And what's the name of that congregation?
BMH/BJ. The congregation when I grew up was Beth Hamikdash Hagadol, BMH, and then we merged with Beth Joseph's to become BMH-BJ.
So your family were among the founders of which congregation?
BMH.
Okay. And what was your Jewish education like?
So I went to religious school, but not to a day school. So I had religious training twice a week, plus on Saturdays after school, all the way growing up. I was never bat mitzvahed, but that's not because of a lack of religion. It's really because at that time, Orthodox girls were not being bat mitzvahed. I was confirmed there, consecrated there, so
And
all the way through.
What high school did you go to?
I went to Cherry Creek High School.
And
my kids graduated from Cherry Creek High School,
Oh,
so
what
it
do
was
you
a
know?
full round circle. Yep.
And were you involved in any Jewish extracurricular activities in high school?
So I was extremely involved in B'nai B'rith Girls, BBYO, B'nai B'rith Youth. I served in many positions on the chapter level, including president. I served as Rocky Mountain, that was Shalom BBG 549, which no longer is active. And then I served as regional president, Nicaea, for Rocky Mountain region here. And I also served as their Yehudiah, which is their Jewish person on the board to help with Judaica. And then I served as international Siganit, which is vice president in charge of membership, and I planned the international convention.
Oh my goodness.
I also was a coordinator the year before for international convention and had attended a leadership training program on the national level, as well as other international programming.
And did you have non-Jewish friends as well as Jewish friends?
Yes, I absolutely did.
And did you encounter anti-Semitism in high school?
I don't remember anti-Semitism in high school.
And what college did you go to?
So I went to Duke University in North Carolina.
And how did you choose that?
It's kind of a funny way I ended up at Duke. So after between my junior and senior year, I was visiting my aunt and uncle in Norfolk by myself, and we drove down and saw the school, and there was no pressure. It may have been between my sophomore and junior year. It was the first school I had seen, and the process of getting into schools now is so much different, so I don't remember if it was sophomore or junior year, but it was the very first school I saw, and I went down and we toured, and I thought it was beautiful, and I really liked it, and I fell in love with the school. And then I went through the circuit of, visiting other schools and deciding where to apply and what to do. And Duke, I think because it wasn't part of the pressure of looking at everything, it stuck out to me. And when I was deciding, I really was deciding between UC Berkeley and Duke, which are 2 completely different places and 2 completely different schools. And I ended up at Duke. And I really loved it. It was a wonderful experience.
What did you major in?
So I majored, took a double major. One was called Comparative Area Studies. They call it something different now, but similar. You take 2 parts of the world and you do an interdisciplinary study comparing the 2 parts of the world. And I looked at an East-West conflict because at that time the wall was very real and there was a real East-West issue. When the wall fell, I said, okay, there goes my degree. But in reality, that's not true, because it taught me how to think about things, the culture, the components. I took a lot of sociology, a lot of cultural anthropology, and I double majored in political science. So my emphasis was in political science, some language, some history. And then I wrote a thesis, which was definitely wasn't about East-West. It was about Jews, immigrants in Israel and immigrants in France. And the reason I chose those two areas was because not immigrants so much, but foreigners in those countries. So I looked at Palestinians who were living in Israel, so not Palestinians in the West Bank. That time Gaza wasn't an issue, it was the West Bank, but those that had chosen to live in Israel itself versus the Algerians who were living in France. And I chose the two groups because both are a Muslim background, and the way they were handled in the two countries was very, very different. And through that paper, it was very interesting because I really created some real stir within my family. I think my father thought I was crazy because I really believed that the Palestinians in Israel were not being treated right.
And when you were in college, did you belong to Hillel or go to services or anything?
So I did belong to Hillel. I was intricately involved in getting Hillel on campus to be a bigger thing. At the time that I was there, it met in the basement of the chapel, which, if you know Duke's campus, it has a beautiful cathedral chapel in the center, and it met there. Subsequently, they've now built a full building and have a wonderful Hillel program and a Chabad house, but Chabad was not present there. But I was more religious going through school than I was even growing up. I kept a kosher kitchen. I think being in an environment where there were less Jews made me want to be more Jewish.
Interesting. And then did you go directly to law school from there?
No, I took 2 years off, I think, maybe one. I don't remember now. So everybody always told me I had to go to college and I had to do, I had to go to college, but nobody ever told me when I graduated from college I had to do something. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I'm dyslexic, and so reading was a really big deal, and I wasn't sure that I really wanted to have a career that was reading. So I ended up going to Europe, to London, and I worked for an American law firm there, translating documents from English to French. And what I learned was I loved Europe, and I loved the cultures and everything I had studied about different cultures, and I hated translation documents back and forth, and I wasn't so crazy about business law because it was all about money going back and forth. So I came back to the U.S., and I worked for a criminal defense lawyer who, when I met him, a very good friend of mine had been his investigator, and she was going to law school, so she introduced us, and he said, well, you're definitely going to get a lot of people skills around here. And on my first day in that job, I picked up the phone and the guy said, is this Nancy? That's the person I was replacing. And I said, no, this is Jacqui. And he said, well, this is Tony and they're here. I said, who's there? He said, the FBI's here. And so I put my hand over the phone and I turned to the assistant. Her name was Pat. Pat, what do I do? He says, well, you tell her you're going to be there. So I said, okay, Tony, I'm coming. So she hands me this map, which at that time, you had written maps, and DC's map was a book. And she flips to the right page, and she shows me the picture. And I get in the car, and I drive, and I'm in a part of DC, Southeast, that I had never really been in. And I turned around, and you could see the Capitol, and this gorgeous view. It just took my breath away. So I get there, and they're all in their bulletproof vests, and I get out of the car. He says, you can't go in there. They've got the street cordoned off. And I say, well, I work for his lawyer. And they say, oh, his lawyer's here. I go, no, it's not his lawyer. This is my first day on the job. And I walk down with all these guys with the major weapons and in their bulletproof vests, and I climb the stairs, and Tony and I walk out. What I didn't neglect to say is, as Gary was going to court that morning, he said, and when I'm done, I'm going to, there's a warrant out for Tony's arrest, and I'm going to take him in. So he had planned to go, turn himself in, but they would have gone in together. So I walk him out and make sure he's safe, and, we turn Tony in. This was before you had issues with the police. This is before the gangs. In D.C. you had the P Street fighting with the Q Street. You didn't have all these other things. And, that job really taught me a couple things. One of which was that there's a fine line between right and wrong. And the difference, I got locked down once in jail because they couldn't get their count right when I was interviewing somebody. And we talked for 4 hours about every book we had read, everything else. It wasn't Tony, it was somebody else. And what I learned was that the difference was that I would do anything for my family within the law, within the reason. And they would do anything, period. And that was kind of the difference. But what I also learned was that everybody's life is very important, and you have to be very careful about respecting people for who they are and what they do. And I had a hard time with criminal law because I felt like if I went on vacation, somebody was sitting in jail that maybe shouldn't be there. And so there was stuff I didn't like about the business side. There's stuff I didn't like about the criminal side. And, we had one trial where the guy was an employee at the Naval Yard, and he wore the same tie every day because Gary gave it to him because he didn't own a suit. He didn't own anything wear. And the jury hung. And why did they hang? Because there was one guy on that jury who said anybody who can wear the same tie for a week straight must be guilty. That was it. It's the only reason. And he wasn't, this one I know didn't do what they had accused him of. But what I learned was right isn't always right and wrong isn't always wrong, and that there's a gray area in the middle that you have to deal with. But you got to set your values, and you got to set your ethics, and you got to stick with them.
And so from this experience, did you choose to go to law school then?
Yes, and I went to law school while I was still working for Gary. I started as a night student. And the more I studied, the more I was unenamored with criminal law for a different reason, because the law is more basic and the facts are typically the same. So it wasn't as intriguing, it wasn't as complicated. So I did a little bit of work my third year with medical malpractice and white collar work, and I hated the medical malpractice, but I loved the white collar because it kind of mixed both worlds. When I graduated, I clerked for a U.S. District Judge, Judge Weinshank, who Zita Weinshank was the first woman on the bench here in Colorado, both on the state bench and then on the federal bench. She passed away last year. And then after I spent every day in that courtroom doing something Gary taught me, and was say, you look at every lawyer that comes through here and you pick who you want to work for. And I picked a gentleman named Tom Coghill, who was a very well-known litigator, and he picked me. And I went to work for Tom, a small firm, 10 lawyers, and I was the first woman to ever get pregnant in that firm. So I had to figure out how I was getting to take maternity leave in that firm, and I got it all worked out. And when I was 7 months pregnant, the firm folded. There was some infighting going on amongst the partners, and it folded. So I was on the market 7 months pregnant, looking for a new job. And I would go into interviews and I would say, okay, I would go through the whole interview. I say, okay, let's address the elephant in the room, because they weren't allowed to ask me, but I wasn't going to get a job, because in the 90s, people didn't hire women that were pregnant, because why would I go back to work? So I wanted to talk about it. And I decided to go back to the courthouse while I was going through this process. There was a new judge on the bench. His name was Walker Miller, not related to me. And he needed somebody who was experienced to help set up his chambers, and I did that. So I went back and I did that, and then I had the baby and I finished with him. It was just a short stint because I wasn't sure I was going to get a job. I did get a job. It was with a firm called Fairfield and Woods. So I went from Coghill and Goodspeed back to the courts and then back to Fairfield and Woods, and I hated it. I was doing a lot of bankruptcy work. I probably would have taken a job sweeping the streets because I was so scared I wasn't going to get a job. But I really didn't like it. I was doing a lot of bankruptcy work, and I didn't feel that they had me filing a lot of pleadings that I wouldn't have filed if I had been practicing on my own. And I just didn't.
Were you representing one side or the other?
Mostly defense work. On the bankruptcy side, mostly people going bankrupt. I wrote, in law school, I went to Georgetown Law School. I think I skipped that. I went to Georgetown and I was an editor for the Law Review at Georgetown. And I ended up switching from the night program to the day program. I finished in 3 years with the summer. I got married in the middle after my second year to my husband, David, who was also, we met at Duke, but we got married when both law students. He was at Georgetown, Washington, and I was at Georgetown. But so anyway, why did I start back there? What was I
So
talking about?
now you're not
So-
enjoying bankruptcy.
Yeah. So I wrote an article there, and then I helped revise and write the bankruptcy Bible, essentially, for the state of Colorado at that edition, which writing is, I love writing, but I don't love the technical writing, so it was not really my thing. I wasn't happy, and a lot of the guys from Cog Hill had gone to US West, so they said, you should come work with us, and I did, and I loved my job at US West. I helped US West go through Y2K, which for those of you that didn't go through it, we thought the world was going to come to an end, and for a phone company, that was a big deal. So I really ushered that in. I also negotiated CALEA, which CALEA is the wiretapping laws with the FBI, which was very unusual because as a baby bell out in the middle of the West, we should not have been the first to negotiate. We should have had to just sign, but we didn't. And the reason we didn't was we were having the Olympics in Salt Lake City, and they needed us first. So I got to do that. And then I started doing a lot of compliance and ethics work, working with anti-corruption, with risk management, things like that, which I really liked. I had my second child while I was at US West, and while I was out on maternity leave, US West became Quest. They were acquired, and everybody kept calling saying, don't you want to take a package? Don't you want to take a package? And I kept thinking, why would I want to take a package? It's the second best job I've ever had, so second to clerking. I went back, and the culture had completely changed, and Quest was no US West for lots of different reasons, and I did leave, and I ended up going to Newmont Mining. A friend of mine's husband was working there, and some friends of mine were, and I managed their litigation worldwide for 13 years. And I did a lot of environmental work, which seems a little funny from a mining company perspective, but I really believe that they do a good job with something that's not so easy. I started doing a lot of sustainable development work with them, and I built their compliance and ethics program from the ground up. The first day I came in there, we were sued by 1,000 separate individuals in Peru for a spill of mercury that had happened under a contractor's watch, and that taught me a lot. But it also started a investigation from the DOJ into anti-corruption, which is now public and never went anywhere. We were never brought to, it died. It didn't happen to produce a lawsuit. So that got me interested in compliance and ethics, and I built their program. And after 13 years, I left and I went out on my own. And I think I mentioned before that, well, maybe not. Anyway, when I was in-house and when I was doing all that, I was raising 2 children. When I was at US West and out on leave is when I had my second child, so I always joke that I should never get pregnant again because every time I do, wherever I am seems to explode. But when I was at Newmont, I really started looking at the compliance and ethics side more and what I wanted to do, and I loved it. So when I left Newmont, I went out on my own, and that gave me a chance to finally do work in the community, which I really wanted to do, which is when I joined NCJW. But what I did on my own is my business now, and I've done it for 10 years, is I represent small and medium-sized enterprises and help them build compliance and ethics programs and deal with anti-corruption issues and show them how they can do business without corruption and without fraud and without misconduct of other sorts as well.
And this is mostly with firms that are working internationally?
It's a mix, but my business is primarily abroad. I do a lot of work with the World Bank, with the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and the Bank of Americas. And I take on clients that have gone cross-eyed with the bank, and I help them understand how they can continue to do business in their country, but with a more ethical standpoint, so that they can also do business with the bank that they're trying to get funding from. And I love it. I feel like I take a small step forward to take 3 steps backwards, but I feel like I'm making a small difference in the world, one small step at a time. It also allowed me to balance my clock and my time a little bit better, and that allowed me to get involved in NCJW and other community activities.
So let's turn our attention now. I'll just ask you one quick question before we go to NCJW. What kind of a Jewish home have you had as an adult with your own children and husband?
Well, our Jewish home has been really important to us. It was important for my children, for me, that my children loved Judaism and their faith and were able to question and think about what they wanted in their lives. And I tell my husband all the time that we were very successful on the Judaica front because both of our children have a good sense of Judaism. But both of my children went to public schools, but went to a Hebrew school program. My daughter was bat mitzvahed. My son was, of course, bar mitzvahed. Both children's, we were in Israel. Both children spent a summer in Israel, and then we just recently went back as a family. So there's a sense of connection there. Like with my home growing up, Friday night was sacred. We always had Shabbat dinner. We celebrated all the holidays.
Did you belong to a congregation?
Yes. So we belonged to BMH-BJ. So both of my children went to Hebrew school at Aish and were involved in their teen programming, primarily because BMH at the time really did not have the same abilities in teen programming that Aish had. And we stayed there until the kids were older, and then we went back to BMH-BJ.
So you had a lot to juggle. You had 2 children, very serious career, and you said that it wasn't until you really went into business for yourself that you found the time to do some meaningful work in the community?
Yeah. And also, my son is a special needs, he's a twice exceptional child. So raising Ryan was a task for the community. It definitely does take a village. There is no doubt. He is great. He is completely independent, and both children are wonderful individuals. But that was the other thing that took a lot of my time.
So tell us about how you got involved with NCJW.
Well, when I went out on my own, I knew I wanted to get involved in the community, and NCJW represents issues that really mattered to me. And it was somewhere that you weren't just having lunch with ladies, you were actually rolling up your sleeves and getting stuff done. So it was attractive to me. My sister, Jennifer, introduced me to NCJW, I really fell in love with it and thought it was also a good way to spend more time with her.
About what time frame are we talking about?
I don't remember exactly, but it would have been after I finished at Newmont before, and that'll be 11 years next month.
Okay. And so what were the issues that NCJW was grappling with that most interested you, would you say?
At that time or now?
Well, when you got started.
Well, when I got started, I wasn't as interested on the political side as I was on the community service side. And Jennifer was in charge of community service, and they were doing some great projects with the Gathering Place, and that was really intriguing to me. They were, doing a Hanukkah party for the Gathering Place and teach some of the lessons of Hanukkah that go across the board. So helping women that were really struggling, some things like that.
Mm-hmm. So you were involved with hands-on kinds of community service?
Mostly community service.
Efforts.
And when I first took a leadership role, it was as Vice President of Community Service.
And did you make any changes in that role?
I don't know that I would call them changes, but expansion. So we really did expand from really we still did the Gathering Place, but we added, instead of just Hanukkah, we started doing a Passover Seder for them. And we actually cooked and went through the Seder the same way, not a full-blown Seder, but more of what the lessons are in that. And then we tried to figure out how we could do more there. We adopted a school up in Westminster, Sunset Ridge Elementary, and we started with them by just providing supplies for the teachers, because every teacher has to dig into their own pocket, and this was a way that we could put things in their classroom. That's evolved over time now, while I was community service, to include a drive for backpacks. So now we fill 100 backpacks a year for students that can't buy their own supplies. We still do the teacher supplies. We tutor in the school. We do a program we call Feed the Families, which puts $100 in families in needs pockets over the holidays to help feed their families. During COVID, we started a book drive there, where we every student on the last day of school leaves with a book to read for the summer, because during COVID we were reading over Zoom with classes, and so we thought that was a way to do that. So we've expanded that program a lot. We have done some others. Those are the two that come to mind the most, but there are others that we've done. We started knitting for a cause, so we knit for women in need, and that still happens once a month. So we started doing that. So lots of different community service projects while I was community service VP.
And from there, how did you evolve into becoming president?
Well, my sister unfortunately got sick her last year as president, and I stepped in kind of in an interim way without becoming president or even interim president, and I liked it. And I really saw that there was a lot of potential in the organization that we could still grow on. Jennifer made a great base, but there was a lot of work that could still be done, and I really wanted to make an impact and a difference.
So when you assumed the presidency in a formal way, what were your goals at that point?
They were to really expand our membership. We were at about 250 members, and we were much older as a membership as a whole, really focusing on some of the communication aspects, beefing up our programming. We were doing a lot of educational programming at the time, including there was another program we did was community service called Ask the Doctor, and Jennifer had started that, and I did one of them as VP, and then we were alternating that with the candidates forum that we do on years of elections. She also had chaired that, but we did a lot of listen and learns, and I wanted to turn the listen and learns into action. So as community service, I did a program on the homeless, and that year I became president, we started doing bags for the homeless, that you would put the bags together and we would deliver them, because the woman who came to speak said the best way to become invisible is to become homeless, because nobody recognizes that you're there, and that the most impact we could have was to hand them supplies. And so that's what we started doing. So that's an example of turning it into action. George Brockwell came and spoke about the Aurora shooting and the trial that he had run there. It happened to be a week after the STEM shooting, so that was a big, I was surprised he came. But out of that, we decided we want to do a gun forum for youth, to hear their opinions and try to solve this problem. That still hasn't happened, but I'm working on it. I hope it will happen with different high schools in the region. But we did a huge walk with Moms Demand Action with 300 people, and Phil Weiser came and Jason Crow came. It happened to be right after Uvalde, but it was really in response to the King Super shooting up in Boulder. That's an issue that's a big deal down here. We did a lot of work with mental health, and we really beefed up our advocacy so that we could really have a force and an ability. So those were some of my goals.
And when you were president, did you succeed in boosting membership?
Well, we went from 250 to over 500. So yes, including losing a lot of members, not because they walked away, but because they moved away or they passed away. And we lowered the average age. I don't have a great statistic, but I can tell you that we're no longer average age in the 70s. I would tell you it's probably closer to the 50s. We've now got a handful of about 30 members that are under the age of 40. So we're working hard on that. So that's good. We also expanded into Summit County. One of the previous presidents, Arlene Moss, changed our name from the Denver section to the Colorado section, but we really never had members elsewhere. And now we do really have a pocket of members up in Summit County. So that happened. We changed our entire way of communicating. It used to just be a newsletter before that came out 3 times a year. Now we actually have an email system and structure. And Jennifer did put a website in place, but it's been enhanced. And now we started working under me, but now we really are working on our social media. So all of that's happening. So that really happened. We really changed. We went back to the way it had been before with advocacy. We've started our day at the Capitol again, and we really worked hard in the last 2 years of my term to pass bills on reproductive rights, gun violence, and just equitable justice and homeless issues.
So can you share any secrets? How was it that you managed to involve younger women who are facing the same issues that you were facing when you didn't have time for community involvement?
So there's 2 ways, and it's not so much the younger that they're younger. It's, first of all, I believe strongly you have to have one-on-one hands-on experience to get somebody to engage. The issues are relevant to everyone, but somebody has to feel like it matters if they're there or not. And so I think that's really, really important. And so I did a lot of talking one-on-one to anybody who had any interest or who would listen to me about the organization. I also believe that you have to recognize that people can give what they can give and they can't give anymore. So it's okay if you just come once. And I think that if you can get people in the door before they start those families, then they're hooked. And yeah, they're going to take time off, and maybe you'll see them once a year. It's something that interests them. But then they come back. And then they will engage again, and they'll be there. So I think the model has changed over time of what somebody can give and what they can't give. And it can't be their career. It has to be something that fits in. And so that's been part of my model. But I believe that friends beget friends, and that's why we've been able to bring the age down, but not down that low. So most of those women came in to start because we did a Shabbat, and we had a Havdalah service that was beautiful with dancing and music, and we opened it to the community, and we got a group of probably 20 young people in the door, and 3 of them joined. And from those 3, 6 more joined later of their friends. And once you've got a mass, then when people show up in a room, they look around and they say, oh, I see myself here. Whereas when one of them would come, I could get them in the door, but then when they came and they looked around and said, oh, these are all my grandmas, then they didn't want to be here. And so that was really a big difference.
Did you start attending national conferences when you were president? And please start by saying what year you became president.
I became president in 2019. And I brought us through COVID, which was when we went online, and that was a really big piece. I started attending conferences with the first conference they did after COVID. No, that's not right. They did one in 19 before COVID. So in April of 19, before I became president, and I went to that. And then I went to the next one in 2021. Late 2021, they did a conference, and I went to that.
And was that game-changing for you or very influential in terms of your thinking?
No. Yes and no. Jennifer had always said to me, oh, they're so wonderful, you can do all these things. To me, having come out of the corporate world, I wasn't as impressed as she was because I had seen a lot of very big conferences and big things that had gone on like that. But I met some incredible women What was a game changer to me on the international level was Beatrice Kahn, who was national president at the time that I became president. She had president's meetings they weren't by Zoom, they were on the phone, and then they changed to Zoom after COVID, and we learned how to use Zoom. But they really helped me see that there were others going through similar things and really helped me out. And I really got to know the national board better, and I got very impressed with what they do that way.
And that's how they became impressed with you, because you're now a member of the national board.
So
right?
ironically, at that conference I went to after COVID, they stood up and said, is anybody interested in serving on the national board? We're going through nominations. And I went home and I started thinking about it, and I knew that my term was going to be up, and I wasn't ready to walk away from NCJW, and I haven't on a section level either. But this was a way I saw to be able to continue and to enhance what I'm doing. So I applied to be on the national board from that. So before that, I was impressed with what they were doing, but I didn't know that I was capable of serving on that level.
And do you have any objectives right off the bat? When did you join the board?
In July. So I'm a board of directors member. And I just started working with them. And this is going to be a real year of change for National Council. They're doing a strategic plan now, and I really hope that I'll be able to help roll that out once it's finished and announced and whatnot. I feel like I really am a champion for sections. I understand what it's like to be in a section and what we go through and what National can do to help. So that's another area. I'm serving on the development committee. So I always used to say that I was not a fundraiser, that I can't raise any money. But I've learned over my presidency that I actually can, that it's not about going out and making the ask. It's going out and being really wonderful about the things you love and spreading that buzz, and then people seem to want to support and give. So that's one of the things I'm still doing for the section. That's one of the commitments that I made, was to help build us a legacy program and a endowment program. And so I'm learning how to do that, and so I stood up to do that on the national level too. I really believe that we as an organization have come as far as we can as a volunteer-only organization, and that if we here are going to go another step, we need staff, and in order to have staff, we need more funding. And so that's a big reason why that's a big motivator for me. So I'm doing that still locally. I'm running a leadership training program, which meets once a month, to help build our pipeline and our future leaders, and then I'm hoping to work on that gun violence program that I told you about. So those are the things that I'm still working on here. And on the national level, I'm hoping to help be a champion for sections, help implement whatever that strategic plan ends up with, the development committee, and then I am the inevitable lawyer in me is on the bylaws committee. So
that sounds like fun.
I don't know that I volunteered for that one, but that one I will work on. And you know what I do in my work is a lot of governance and bylaws type stuff anyway. So that's a good mix. So that's where I'm at.
When you look back over all of your years of involvement with NCJW, do you have a sense of what makes you most proud?
There are a couple things. I am really proud of what we've been able to do to help women and children in the community. I helped us put a trip together, and we went to the border in May, and we really got to see firsthand what the issues are around immigration and how complicated the issue is. We met a family that was in the shelter in Juarez. We went to El Paso and Juarez, and they are now settled here in Colorado, and we've been helping that family since June, and that is incredibly fulfilling for me because I see an ability to help. Again, it's one little thing at a time. The school is a huge thing for me. When I know that I'm helping kids learn to read and to be able to hopefully better their future because of what we're doing, that makes a huge difference, and I've been tutoring there. I have been very proud of what we've done on a political side and with the legislation and getting more people to engage there, the passing of the laws that make a huge impact on reproductive rights here in Colorado. This year we hope to get a amendment to the Constitution to solidify that no matter who's in office. So that's a big one. I really am proud of what we've done with our membership. And it gives me great joy when we get a group of people together and someone says, well, I'm here because of Jacqui. And I hope I've left a mark that lasts a long time, not just through what I did and what I saw needed to be done, but what all those people that I was able to bring into the organization see and want to do in the future.
I have a question about how you walk the line between being a political advocate on one hand as an organization and nonpartisan on the other when you're dealing with what are fundamentally political issues.
So the world is a different place than it was before. We fight for issues, not for candidates. We fight for issues, not against or for a party, okay? So gun violence is a good example because it isn't a party line, although the NRA, the gun lobby definitely sits on one side a little bit more than the other. But it's hard-pressed to have a Republican tell you that they're for gun violence. That's for surely not happening. So it doesn't really matter which side of the floor you sit on. Nobody wants to see people shot up in schools or in grocery stores or anything like that. So it's a nonpartisan type issue. Not all issues are that way. Reproductive rights is a very political issue and unfortunately draws a line in the sand. But that's not completely true. You've seen Republicans that do believe in a woman's right to choose, things like that. But we fight for issues. Over time, issues have become partisan. But that's not always been the case, and I believe it's cyclical. I don't believe it will always be that way. Politics has also changed from not being being very state-oriented now, as opposed to just, national seems to kick the butt. Our U.S. Capitol seems to kick the butt to say, well, that's a state issue. Let's make it a state issue. You'll see a swing back where they say, no, we don't want the states doing everything they want to do. So I think it's cyclical. But that's how you tote the line. We fight for issues, not for candidates. We fight for issues, not for parties.
And again, in retrospect, when you look back at all of the NCJW leaders who may have influenced you, who stands out in your mind as being most influential or most impressive?
Well, there are different leaders for different reasons. My sister, for starters, because she got me involved and she cared so deeply about this organization and went through some political tough times getting to through her presidency. But Glenda Kaufman is one. Glenda is she was our SPA, she was a president, she served as our vice president of public affairs. She made a huge impact on this state and on the politics here in this state. But she's very humble, and she won't tout her own horn, and she has been a great influence to me through my presidency because she doesn't say you must do it this way. Instead, she says, well, tell me what's going on. And then if I ask very specifically, she'll give me advice. But otherwise, she's a good sounding board. She listens, and she believes that everybody has to figure out what works for them. I really admire Arlene Moss because she's had the vision to make us bigger than just Denver. Cindy Coleman was another very great SPA who worked tirelessly to pass law issues and things. Doris Lackner is an amazing leader who was there, who really made an impact. And she also influences me. And I could go on. There's lots of them.
And in terms of the impact that NCJW has had on you personally, on your own life, how could you sum that up?
It's been amazing. It's given me incredible friendships. It's given me drive to get things done and a method to do them, whether it's community service, whether it's passing laws that I think make a difference. I feel like it's given me focus and it's given me drive to make an impact and a difference in our community.
And if you look back on your presidency, have you learned anything from it, and would you have done anything differently?
Yes. First of all, I'm proud of what happened, and I'm proud of what was going on. And I'm really proud of bringing Michelle on as a president-elect because I felt like that gave her a chance to learn. But more importantly for me selfishly, it gave me the ability to let go. Because without knowing someone was really ready and you had spent all that time building, to let go and be scared that it wasn't going to be in good hands would have been very difficult. And I knew I had done everything I could to put us in good stead. That also is good for Michelle because I don't walk around saying, well, you should do it this way, because I know she knew how I did it. And if she was making a change, it was calculated in a decision that catapults us to a new level. And she too will fall on her face. I fell on mine plenty of times, but she has to try. And so that was really a very positive change that I made for me personally, but also for the organization to have somebody that was really ready to take over. But I am controlling in some ways. I don't like to see something fail. And if I was to do it again, I would let go a little bit more and let people fail a little bit because I think that makes them stronger in the end. And I regret not doing that.
Well, from my vantage point as a foot soldier in the organization, I was always in awe of how ambitious you were in terms of the number of projects that you took on and your personal commitment to the organization. So I just want to add that little bit and say thank you on behalf of the entire membership, because it was a very impressive act to watch from afar.
I often like to, so thank you very much. I often like to set my goals really high, even if I can't reach them completely. Maybe that's some of the dyslexia, that I keep all these long lists and then I get a third of it done, which is a lot, but I always feel like there's something left to do.
So I think that I've covered everything. Oh, do you now belong to any other Jewish organizations?
So I stay involved with B'nai B'rith Youth as an alumni. I also am now president of our synagogue, BMHBJ.
Oh my goodness.
So I took that on in October. I was supposed to be waiting until June, but something happened and I became president. So that's a big task for me. So I have that, and then the national board, and that's really what I'm doing.
That's more than enough, yeah. I would think, right? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jacqui.
Well,
it's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Cynthia. I really enjoyed having our conversation.
Great.
Okay, let's go.
Perfect.